Welcome to lesson number 4. We're going to be looking at operations with functions and investigating the quotient of two functions. So, dividing function f by function g of x. Now, the first example is completed for us. So, at x equals 4, we're at 14 and 2. Sorry, at x equals 4, we're going to be at 14 and 2. And so at f divided by g of x, we would have 7. And so as we complete function f, we're gonna complete the y values going down the table and function g going down the y-axis as well. So at x equals 3, we are at 6. At x equals 2, we're at 0. X equals 1, we're at -4. At x equals 0, we're at -6. X equals -1, we're at -6. -2, we're at -4. And -3, 0, 6. And we're going to complete the y values of g of x as well. And -6. Now, if we look at f divided by g of x, just like we were doing earlier, we're dividing f of x by g of x, and we complete all of these by dividing my function f by function g. Now 6 divided by 1 is going to be 6. 0 divided by 0, and we're dividing by 0, and so this is undefined, also known as an indeterminate. So, or an indeterminate. So you can't divide by 0. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and -1. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to graph our new function. Now, before I graph the new function, we want to explain why the domain of the function f divided by g of x is not an element of real numbers. Now, the reason why is because of this point here. So, division by 0 is undefined. So, hence, not a real number. And that is when x is equal to 2. So, that means that x can't equal 2. Now I'm going to plot all these points on my new graph. So at x equals 4, we were at +7. So 4 and 7, 6. And at 2, it's not quite a 5, right? But it still follows that trend. But where it was maybe supposed to be a 5, we're going to have an open circle here. And then we're going to continue our line going down. And so it's going to look like this. And then it's not going to go through that point, but it's going to continue down my graph. So the functions f and g above are f of x, which is equal to x squared plus x minus 6. That is my parabola, and g of x, which is equal to x minus 2. We want to write and simplify an expression for the function f divided by g of x, including our domain restriction. So, f divided by g of x is equal to function f, which is x squared plus x minus 6, x squared plus x minus 6 divided by x minus 2. Now, recall back to pre-calculus 11, working with rational expressions. This is a rational expression, and if we want to simplify this, remember that we need to factor my trinomial on as my numerator. So that's going to be x plus 3 times x minus 2, if I factor by inspection, divided by x minus 2. And now we can cancel out factors, not terms. So my new function is x plus 3. And with our restriction, remember that x cannot equal +2, which we can see from working with rational expressions that x can't equal positive 2. And we now know why, because we have an indeterminate value there, which results in a non-real number. Now we want to evaluate f divided by g of negative 6. This is going to equal negative 6 plus 3. Negative 6 plus 3 is going to result in negative 3. Now solving operations with functions when we're looking for the quotient of two functions is pretty much the same that we've been doing up until this point. So with the product of two functions and the addition and subtraction of two functions, the only difference is this additional step of factoring whatever trinomial is given to us in the equation. So first of all, we want to write an expression in simplest form for f divided by g of x and state the domain. And so f divided by g of x would be equal to 2x squared minus 13x minus 7 divided by 2x plus 1. Now I'm going to take this function here and I'm going to factor it. So 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. And so if we think about our little riddle, what multiplies to give me 2 times negative 7 or negative 14 and has a product of negative 13. So a product starting of negative 14 and a sum of negative 13. I think I said that backwards. And so we have 2 times 7, but we also have 14 times 1. And if we want a sum of negative 13, then it's going to be this one here, and that's going to be negative 14 and positive 1. So here we have 2x squared plus x minus 14x minus 7. And here is my grouping. And I'm going to factor out my x. So x times 2x plus 1. And I'm going to factor out negative 7, which would leave me with 2x positive 1. And so here are my factors. That's going to be 2x plus 1 times x minus 7 over 2x plus 1. And now I can cancel out my factors, leaving me with x minus 7. And my domain is going to be x can't equal negative 1/2. And so when I list my domain, I would just say x is still an element of real numbers. However, x cannot equal negative 1/2. Now explain two different ways to calculate or evaluate f divided by g of 3, and then we want to actually calculate it. So number one, we could input 3 into the function. The function x minus 7. Or number two, we could input 3 into f of x and g of x individually, and then solve, and then divide. And then if we actually solve it, we're going to be inputting it into f divided by g of 3, which would equal x minus 7, or positive 3 minus 7, and that would result in negative 4.